Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, and fellow council members. Welcome to this open house community forum of the town of Stonewall and the RM of Rockwood annexation process. I would like to welcome all property owners and those whose properties will be affected in this annexation process. My hope and that of both council is to give a clear, precise understanding of this process and to dispel any misunderstanding that this process might have brought to your attention. Please feel comfortable in asking any pertinent question that relates to your property and the processes. Finally, I would like to thank the RMF Rockwood, Reeve Taplin, and Council for the amicable and diligent work relationship we have shared in the past 2 years. It certainly has made what could have been an arduous process very respectful indeed. And at this time, I would like to invite Reeve West Taplin to bring greetings.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend the open house or the forum tonight. My take on this is that we want all three parties, the town of Stonewall, the RM of Rockwood, and the residents or constituents that are involved to all be positively affected and have a great outcome. The town of Stonewall has been doing the lion's share of the work because it's on their side and it's going to benefit them and also benefit us, you know, with the spin-offs of more people in the community and everything else. So with that, I have to say thanks very much to Wally Melnick for all the hard work and diligence that he's been doing, and to Clive and his council for, you know, expressing and treating us as a great neighbor. So thanks very much.
Thanks for that, Reeve Taplin. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce CAO Wally Melnick, as he will be in the lion's den explaining and moving the path forward. Welcome, Wally Melnick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate the kind words. Thank you also to Reeve Taplin. And I think as both heads of council have said, this process has been a fairly lengthy one, but has been a very amicable one. And we hope today we can provide additional information for those of you who have questions, but also talk a little bit about process and next steps as we move through the various stages of the annexation process. As a starting point here, we just want to refresh everyone's memory about what's being proposed. So you see on this map, the yellow line around the original boundaries of the town of Stonewall. And the red shaded area is the 8-quarter sections of land that have been discussed between the town and the RM as being part of the proposed annexation moving forward. This is what was proposed to the municipal board as part of our submission, as part of the town submission last year. And it's what is being discussed in terms of tonight, and also in terms of any agreements that are being signed at this point. So just want to recap a little bit of the timeline since the last time we met. It's hard to believe that it's been over a year since we were able to engage with individuals who have been affected or could be potentially affected by the annexation proposal. It was January of 2020 when we had the invite meeting with property owners to talk about annexation and to try and provide answers to questions. We will be revisiting some of those issues to ensure that we've got responses back to all the issues that were identified at that January meeting as part of this meeting. But we're going to take the timeline from kind of that meeting in January of 2020 and move it forward to where we are today. In February of 2020, so shortly after that meeting, early last year, the town received its residential land supply and demand study was completed by the province on our behalf. It forms a part of the final submission that goes into the municipal board and into the province as justification and the reason why we need to have the additional lands to be considered for proper planning for the town. In July of 2020, the town of Stonewall approved the submission of an annexation proposal to the municipal board. So that is actually the initial step in terms of launching the formal process. And so what was done was a resolution was passed by council, basically taking the submission that's been posted on our website, providing to the municipal board, and then we have to engage in a process of public consultation based upon the submission that was made. And so council did that through July and through the months of July to November. Council held COVID appropriate meetings with local authorities, and letters of support for the proposal have been received from Interlake Eastern RHA, the Interlake School Division, South Interlake Planning District, and the East Interlake Watershed District. So we've received letters of acceptance of the proposal as outlined to them with regards to each of those entities. But the council went further than just engaging those particular entities. They also spoke to partnership entities that we're involved in. So these are groups that ultimately are funded in part by the town. Some of them are also funded by the RM, and so ultimately they would be impacted by who was paying the bill to them going forward. They included groups such as the South Interlake Regional Library, the Rockwood Rosser Weed Control District, and the new mobility service, the Stonewall Area Mobility Service. Again, we've received letters of support from each of those entities indicating their acceptance and support for the annexation proposal. In the fall of 2020, the town of Stonewall received its water and sewer studies that were completed by WSP, identifying the current infrastructure status of the town's sewer and water, as well as potential expansion opportunities and the infrastructure that would be needed in order to accomplish it in an efficient and effective manner. And so those studies are again going to be part of what is submitted to the municipal board to identify how the annexed lands would be serviced to ensure that it's done in a way that is sustainable and cost effective. Since the inception, so even prior to January of 2020, we've continued in discussions with the RM of Rockwood. We have a draft agreement which has been put in place regarding most issues. There's a couple of outstanding items that we're still talking about back and forth, and ultimately are looking for feedback from the public on some of these issues in order to ensure that we have a position that will be acceptable to, as the Reeve said it, all three groups, the RM, the town, and the citizens who are going to be impacted by the annexation. During the winter and spring of 2021, so over the last couple of months, we want to get a couple of things done. We want to complete the public consultation process, and so that's our first opportunity was today. We're really hoping to do this in a much different venue, in a much more traditional setting in terms of having a discussion in a large hall where people could ask questions and we can make the presentation in front of the people. But obviously the pandemic and the situation we face over the last 12 or 13 months has not allowed for that. And so we felt it important to at least provide some information back to the group and to provide this venue as an opportunity to get some of that feedback from the public. Based on that public feedback, we want to finalize the agreement between the town of Stonewall and the RM of Rockwood. As I mentioned earlier, we have a couple of outstanding issues, but they're fairly minor. And then ultimately that agreement will also become part of the package that is sent to the municipal board for their review in terms of the annexation proposal. And then of course, we want to submit a response and the information accumulated since the summer of 2020, as I mentioned, and submit that to the municipal board for their review. So as part of the process tonight, we wanted to review the questions that were asked of us in the January 2020 meeting. We did give responses to a lot of the questions that night, but we've had since a chance to review it between both municipalities, and we wanted to readdress many of the themes of the conversation that evening. and also provide an opportunity for individuals to ask additional questions if they so see fit based upon the information that's provided. So one of the questions that was asked, and this may not be the exact wording of the question, but the overall theme, have developers approached the town or the RM regarding any property in the proposed annexation area? And the answer to that is that there have not been direct approaches from developers to the town. But the town was approached by a landowner who is in the annexed area asking to be included in the town limits. So that was kind of the impetus to get this started. We have not been approached by developers as I've stated, but ultimately we believe that once the land is available for development through the annexation process, that there will be interest in having it developed. Another question that was asked in a number of different ways over the course of that evening was, how will the mill rate affect farmland? In 2020, what was the difference in the mill rate between the two municipalities? It was less than 1 mill. About 0.954 mills was the difference between the at-large mill rate for the town and the at-large mill rate for the RM. As part of our agreement with the RM, the town has committed to examine the provision of services and the use of special service levies to ensure a fair mill rate on annexed property relative to services received. In other words, the town is willing to look at services that are currently being provided, things like policing and street lighting and beautification, which may not provide benefit to the annexed lands, and looking to potentially charge those out as special service levies to ensure that the mill rate that is charged on all properties is reflective of the services received. And we think if we do that, the mill rate differential between what's being currently charged in the RM and what's currently being charged in the town will be very close to being the same. Will assessments stay the same for farmland? Will assessments stay the same for acreages without farmland? Assessment will not change based on the jurisdiction that it resides. Assessment legislation and policies are province-wide, and as such are applied the same within or outside an urban setting. So it doesn't matter whether you're in the town or the RM, the assessment system is the same, the portioning rates are the same, so there would be no impact by being either in a town or in the RM. With the growth and extension of infrastructure, however, we do feel that there will be increase in property values based upon the desirability of that property, either for purchase by developers or otherwise. And so there could be increases in property value based upon increased services or increased infrastructure, but it would not be based upon anything other than that. It wouldn't be based on anything specific to an urban or a rural municipality. And will the portion assessment be the same for farmland? And the answer for that is yes. What happens when the town takes on new debt after the annexation? Will the annexed properties be expected to pay for that debt through taxation? An example that was given that night was another lagoon expansion. The town is committed, as both at the public meeting back in January of 2020, as well as within the agreement that we are signing with the RM, that they are prepared to ensure that the current debt of the town stays with the existing ratepayers or the existing boundaries of the town. That can be done through a number of different ways, but it's part of the agreement and it'll be part of the submission made to the municipal board. So there's no expectation that the current debt of the town would be in any way added to the responsibility of the new property that would be annexed into the town limits. As for future debt and who pays and how it will be determined is based upon the projects that are submitted for feedback to the community at that time. So individuals and property owners in the annexed properties would have an opportunity to provide their feedback. And so there's and it'll be based upon the submission or the application or the project that is being proposed. So there's no ability to be able to say that going forward there won't be a debt added, but current debt will not be imposed on the RM properties. Will a 5-acre lot pay more taxes than a 100 by 120 foot lot? This is a hard question to answer in absolute terms because of all the variables involved in establishing the assessment of property. Taxes will be based on the assessment of the property, which in turn considers whether the site is serviced, whether there's a paved road, how desirable is the parcel, etc. So again, as I've stated earlier, we're committed to ensuring that property only pays taxes based upon the services they're getting, and we plan to use special service levies to ensure that. But in terms of the assessment of property, we do not have control over that, and we believe that it will be the same whether it be in the town or the RM. But ultimately, properties may change values based upon their desirability or the infrastructure that becomes stationed either on it or beside it, and its desirability for potential purchase. Will there be taxation based on frontage? How does that apply to acreages and farmland? Taxation in most cases is based on assessment. It is usually local improvement or special service levies that look at a per parcel or frontage payments. The answer to the question is it depends on the proposal being put forward at the time. So there are rules within the Municipal Act that allow for adjustment for large lots, odd shaped lots, to not pay overburdensome taxes based upon services provided. Again, that'll be part of any submission of future proposals for local improvements or for special services. But again, as part of the town's commitment today, we're not looking to charge anything extra to the properties that are currently being looked to be annexed, other than for the services that they would be receiving. What is the permit process if you want to add a building to your property? Is it different? And so the issue here is, again, asking about development, I guess, or the opportunity for development. SIPD, or the planning district, South Interlake Planning District, has jurisdiction over both the town and the RM. So the process would be the same. It should not change whether you're part of the town limits or whether you're part of the RM. Will the town's bylaws impact annexed properties on items such as animal control, discharging a firearm, or controlled burning? So we talked about this a little bit at the meeting back in January of 2020, and we've since had a fair number of conversations about it between the town and the RM. And the town has committed to allowing existing operations to remain and to amend bylaws that may impact. The town is also committed to amending existing bylaws to adjust current operational policies in the annexed property. So for example, our burning bylaws is significantly different than the RM's burning bylaw. And what the town has agreed to is that they would look to amend their current burning bylaw to allow for the same processes that are currently in the RM burning bylaw. And that would go on with things like discharging firearms and animal control. So we would go through the full gamut of services and look to make changes so that people weren't adversely impacted by simply becoming part of the town of Stonewall. Will farmers be able to continue spraying crops, spreading fertilizer, manure, etc.? So the ability of farmers to continue their operations is protected under the Farm Practices Protection Act, which is provincial legislation. And based on that legislation, you would be able to continue to do your farm practice. Will landowners ever be forced to get rid of their livestock through rezoning or after annexation? As we've said a number of times here through today's presentation, the town is committed to grandfathering existing operations. We're not looking to change how people do business, and we're really interested in ensuring that those who continue to do what they're doing today would be allowed to do so. Again, that may change if ultimately someone sells their operation or there's a subdivision, but ultimately if they stay exactly as it is today, the town is committed to grandfathering those existing operations. Will zoning change? The town will need to modify its zoning bylaw once the annexation is complete. The town does not have the ag use zoning in its current bylaw and will need to review that requirement. And so we'll have to take a look at that. But again, we would be looking to create a secondary plan, which means we'd be looking at the land that we've annexed, how it would be properly developed over time, and then ultimately putting in place zoning that would allow existing operations to continue, but also provide for future development if that was the direction that the council wanted the land to go. Is there a minimum quantity of land requirement for subdivision? So this was, I guess, a question about, could small lots be put in place in land that would be annexed? There are minimums when it comes to lot sizes, but in an urban setting, they're much smaller than the current 80 acres. So because your property is currently in an RM or a rural setting, there are restrictions put on by the province in terms of how small a specific subdivision can be. Those restrictions are removed as part of an urban setting. Again, there are limits that we put in place in terms of how small the properties can be, but ultimately they allow for urban type property lots rather than the larger 80-acre type subdivisions. Are lots standardized by developers? Our lot size is standardized for developers by the town. There are minimum lot sizes identified in the town zoning bylaw, and we work with developers to ensure that what's in the zoning bylaw allows them to be successful, and we also want to ensure we keep a standard in terms of the community's development. What is the impact to the land that borders the existing lagoon property? Well, there will be setback requirements with regard to the lagoon, and so some of the property on the west end of the annex lands will be confined to green space that won't be able to go forward with development. Because of those buffers that exist, they will not be available to be developed right to the full extent of the property lines there. The province currently limits the number of driveway accesses accessing provincial highways. Specifically, I think the question was asked about Highway 67. Does that change if a developer wants to purchase an existing property and subdivide it? The province is the authority in terms of access and will more than likely remain, especially when it comes to safety. And again, with large subdivisions or with multiple lot subdivisions, developers normally need to look at creating service roads to accommodate multiple accesses next to busy roads. So there would probably be a need for a service road, but that would be a stipulation that would be part of the subdivision approval process, and highways would get involved there in terms of any requirements they would need. Questions on will sewer, water, and other services be extended to annexed properties? If so, when and who pays? Well, we believe that once the lands have been annexed and are part of the town's boundaries, that services will be extended, but there are no plans that are imminent. Again, we see this annexation as a long-term planning process for the town, probably as much as 50 years. And so simply because property gets annexed, there's no guarantee that services will be extended in a year or two. It could still be many, many years before they're extended. But again, that'll depend a little bit on proper planning and ensuring that the lands that make the most sense get developed first, rather than ones that are inefficient or are either cost inefficient or wasteful in terms of the infrastructure that needs to be implemented. Who will pay the cost? Well, the cost will be borne by the developer of the property, unless there is a larger community benefit, at which time the town may get involved for a portion. So for example, as an example of this, in order to properly service the southeast corner of the property that's looking to be annexed, there needs to be a utility corridor that created that will actually bring water. Water is being provided obviously from the west side of town. Sewer is on the west side of town, and so proper utility corridors have to be built with properly sized pipes that have to be established in order to bring those services back to the starting point, or provide those services from a starting point in terms of water. And so the town may become involved in terms of the larger size pipes that are required, obviously to recoup that money from developers farther down the road as the development occurs. So developers will bear the full cost over time, but the town may have to get involved early on to ensure that infrastructure is built correctly. The town will be examining options to grandfather existing water and sewer options, even if infrastructure goes past the property. So the question, I believe, at the time was asked about whether people were going to be forced to hook up. There is provincial requirements that require that to happen. And the town is looking at all the options that it can to ensure that those who have sewer and water options that are functioning and usable will not be forced. But this is not necessarily just municipal jurisdiction. There is provincial rules there as well. Who maintains roads after annexation? So the agreement that the town and the RM have discussed is kind of a phased approach in terms of transfer of responsibility. The RM will remain responsible for municipal services while properties remain in kind of their current state until there's a triggering event, either subdivision or water and sewer extensions or rezoning. But prior to those events, the RM would continue to provide services, and the town will pay the RM a grant while Rockwood is providing those services. So the two have worked out a scenario whereby we hope the transition will be seamless. The RM provides services while they is still kind of an agricultural or rural type of setting. And when it becomes more urban, the town would then take over responsibility for providing services. And while the RM is providing those services, the town will financially reimburse the RM of Rockwood. How does annexation impact home and property insurance? So again, this is a question that really not related to necessarily municipal stuff, but we don't think there should be any immediate change in the short term. In the longer term, as water hydrants are extended and if pressures are sufficient to provide for fire flows, there may be actually reductions in the insurance rates for your property, but we don't see any changes simply because you become part of an urban center in terms of property insurance. Will the town be adding more schools? Well, schools, hospitals, and a variety of other provincial funded facilities will be placed where demand and need justify. And again, these are provincially funded, provincially decided on entities and facilities. And so it's up to them to decide. And in many cases, when you talk to the departments involved with these facilities or to the ministers or to the bureaucrats, I mean, growth is the key to seeing services in a community. So expansion and annexation, we feel is part of the long-term vision for growth for Stonewall and the area. And we feel that if we're allowed to go through with the annexation, that our schools here will be secure and potentially we'll see expansion in the future, that our hospital here will be secure and hopefully see added services going forward, and that ultimately we will be seen as a hub for the province in terms of service delivery as well for the area around us. A question that was asked, at the previous meeting, and we've had some discussions about this again as the group between the two municipalities, is grandfathering a legally binding process? Could a change in council change what a current council is proposing to agree to? Could a new council take away what has been grandfathered during the annexation process? And I guess the short answer to that is that a new council can always change the policies and direction of a municipality. That's true, and that ultimately is a risk that we face no matter what. However, in the agreement that we have put forward with the RM, the town is committing to certain items, as we've talked about earlier here, in terms of our bylaws, in terms of allowing processes to continue. And that agreement speaks to the commitment of both the town and the RM, and will provide, we think, guidance to future councils, not just the current councils that sign it. In addition, the agreement has stipulated a dispute resolution clause, so there's an ability for either party, the RM or the town, in the future to trigger unilateral binding arbitration. So that means that if a future council of the town is doing something that ultimately is contrary to the agreement, the RM would have the ability to simply go and ask for an arbitrator to come in and provide a solution to the parties. So we think that with the dispute resolution clause, with the commitment in the agreement, that yes, although grandfathering is not necessarily a legal binding process, that there is a lot of things that will continue the commitment of the town going forward with regards to the commitments it's made in the agreement. And with that, we've kind of concludes an update and a recap of where we are with our current process. We would like to open up the session to questions. And we realize, again, this isn't as easy as it normally would be in a forum in a hall. So it's a little more convoluted. I'm going to ask Mayor Lisa Voth from our office to just provide a little bit of an oversight of how the raise your hand will work in this session, just so that everyone gets an opportunity to raise their hand and ask a question, because we'll unmute them. This will help us keep the questions organized and make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak and get an appropriate answer. So Mayor Lisa, if you could just explain the process, please.
Good evening, everyone. On your Zoom screen, you should see a picture that looks similar to the one that we've got on our slide, and you'll see options for reactions. When you click that little reaction button, you should have an option to raise your hand. I can see when your hand is raised, and if you have a question, I'll call your name and ask you to unmute, and then you can go ahead and ask your question.
So at this point, we would ask anybody who's interested in raising an issue to please raise their hand, and we'll try and address their concern.
Okay, so I see we have a question from Councillor Badger. Councillor Badger, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
I think I did it.
You did.
On my screen, I have to go, reactions don't show. I have to go up to the right, the little dots for more, and then I find little things to do. It's not quite the way you described it on that screen.
Okay, perfect. That's good to know. Everyone's got a different operating system. Thank
I'm
you.
using an iPad.
Okay, excellent. I'm not seeing any questions so far.
Okay, well, maybe we can continue then a little bit. We have a little more of the presentation, not a lot. And I guess we would leave it open for individuals who would like to ask additional questions or may have some concerns. They can always provide that information to the town of Stonewall directly through our email, info@stonewall.ca. And we would welcome that in terms of any additional feedback that you may have or additional questions. We intended this to be kind of the first of a couple of meetings that we were going to hold. Again, the intention of this was to try and provide an update and to garner potentially more issues or questions. And if we needed to, we've set a second date for March the 25th, when we would be prepared to answer additional questions that ultimately may not have been addressed in the presentation today. So you're welcome to please provide us additional information or questions or concerns through other means than tonight. And we realize the technology isn't all our friend. I can attest to that. It's been a big learning curve for me over the course of the last 12 months. But so we'll leave it open for that, I guess, and ultimately allow people, if they don't have any questions tonight, to think about what's been stated. This session will be is being recorded. It will be available for people to review over the course of the next number of days, and then provide feedback if they like to in the future. The town and the RM will continue with their dialogue and consultation. As I've said, we have a draft agreement in place that ultimately we need to continue to work on a couple of small areas to complete. And so we will be working on that over the course of the next number of days and weeks. We hope to submit an information package, in other words, our response to the presentation or to the proposal that was submitted last July to the municipal board in April. And that will again include all the studies that have been done, sewer and water infrastructure, the land supply and demand study, and our consultations with all the groups, including the public, will be submitted to the municipal board in April. And we've talked about this throughout our discussions with the RM. Our hope is that if we can do that, that we can have an implementation date of this particular annexation proposal or annexation process for January 1st of next year. Mary Lisa, I think there is a hand up now. Is that
Yes,
correct?
there is, from MJ Lomer. So I'll ask you to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, my question is about the buffer zone around the
Lagoon.
lagoon. Can you explain that to me, please?
Sure. So there's a regulation, provincial regulation that talks about a restriction in terms of creating residential or creating development, having buildings built or construction or next to a lagoon. And so I'm not exactly sure the exact distance, but there will be restrictions on the ability of using the land in the quarter section where the lagoon is located.
So in other, this is Albert. So in other communities that have close proximity of residences to newly constructed lagoons, how far are the lagoons away from the residents?
So I don't have that exact number, but I will commit today to having that number available for our next meeting on the 25th. We will know the exact distance that's as to the limitations in terms of what's allowed and not allowed. But it is a few hundred meters in terms of the buffer that's required.
And is the existing lagoon decommissioned, or is it still active?
No, the existing lagoon is actually active. It is part of the secondary cell process for the town of Stonewall. So what was built was a primary cell. There's also a treatment area for phosphorus, and then the former lagoon, the old lagoon, all of its cells have been converted into secondary cells.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
So we will commit to ensuring that we have the exact number in terms of the restriction for our next meeting in terms of providing that information. There's another hand there, I think, Mary Lisa.
Yep. Scott, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, thanks. Just a quick question. I'm curious to know if there is an order of preferred development. If a developer goes and is looking at a parcel of land, are they free to talk to any piece of land and then start development, or is there an order that the town would like?
So that process, Scott, will be identified through our secondary plan process, and to do it properly and to ensure that no one is purchasing land or making commitments or potentially investing capital in areas where the town does not see growth for some time. We will be establishing kind of developable and holding parcels within the annex property. It doesn't mean that the land won't be developed. It will be, but we may be holding it for infrastructure to hit a certain point, or it may require an investment by a developer in order to get infrastructure to that level. But we are looking to ensure that the development is orderly, to ensure that infrastructure is properly done, and that we have at the end of it a very sustainable community, 25, 30, 40 years down the road.
Okay, thanks.
Len, can you unmute and ask your question?
Yes, just curious, once implementation has taken place and these properties are annexed, how will the potential developers know that, in lack of a better term, the town is open for business? Does the town notify them, or is it up to them to see this through a process that we may not know about? And what is the timeline for that?
So in terms of the maybe going back to Scott's question a little bit, the town will be looking to start the secondary plan process, which is again the process of determining which lands will be made available almost immediately for development and which ones may have to be delayed for a period of time because, again, of infrastructure or other issues. That process will start almost immediately, and it may even start a little bit this year. There are some things that we can do as a precursor or in preparation for that secondary plan, and we would try and get that in place very quickly after annexation was completed, to ensure that, again, everybody had the rules of the game, as it were, going forward. In terms of promotion of the availability of the property, the town will probably not take a position of trying to promote one piece of property over another. I think that would probably be a difficult position for the town to be in. But what we are doing, and what we will continue to do, is that we have made it, we are trying to improve the image, I guess, of the community as being open for business, and we are working hard to try and ensure that developers and individuals who are looking to invest in this community know that Stonewall is a place that is prepared to do business. And we'll continue with that promotion in general terms, but in terms of specific property, the developers would look at things like our zoning map and development plans to determine where they'd want to invest.
Wally, we have a question over chat from Paula. She's asking if there will be sections dedicated for business in the secondary plan.
So we, as much as we would like to have business come into our community as well, we know that the history and probably the future of Stonewall is as a bedroom community, and so residential will always be king in terms of the development that's going to happen in this community. In addition to that, there are some provincial working parts here, some legislation and a plan called 2050 that's being perpetuated right now by the Winnipeg Metro region that talks about things like employable lands and the capacity or inventory that currently exists and the need to limit that capacity going forward. So we're not sure if we'll have the ability to potentially designate a whole lot of the property that we're currently looking to annex into anything but residential, but that we're fine with that. That is, again, that is the source of the success of this community. And we do have areas where we have some concentrated industrial lands like the industrial park. And so it makes sense to have, adjacent parks close to that. And we have a commercial core that we'd like to reinvigorate and to have reinvestment in. So again, commercial isn't necessarily the top priority. We hope to do some, but really the lion's share of it will probably be residential.
MJ Lomer has another question. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, it's Albert Lomer again. I can't get over this lagoon stuff. So if the lagoons are expanded, which direction would they go from the existing?
So the town owns property to the west of the current lagoon cells. So if
Right.
any expansion that would occur west of where they are today.
Okay, and I've got another question as well. If the current land is sold to somebody that wants to continue farming it, how would that impact? How would a tax base impact a second landowner, like say before residential development?
So again, from the perspective of the town, we've committed that if the land is going to continue for an existing use, regardless of ownership, we would continue to allow that to happen. So if someone is farming and they sell that farm within their family, outside their family, and it continues to be a farm, from the town's perspective, we're okay with that. And the RM and the town have agreed that if that's the way the land continues to be used, the RM would probably continue to provide services and we'd continue to provide a grant to the RM. If, however, the second owner, I'll just use that term, eventually decides to extend sewer and water or subdivide off a piece of that land or ultimately sell to a developer, then at that point, there are pieces of the agreement that talk about the transition of that land from a rural setting to an urban setting. And ultimately then the town becomes responsible for municipal services, and it changes in terms of it changes in terms of its appearance, obviously, and its operation and the rules under which it would be governed.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
And we have a question from Jim. Can you please unmute and ask your question?
Yes, my question is about, I have 5 acres and we can have horses on here, chickens, or a limited number of animals. Now, if I was to sell my property, would the next person have the same, be treated the same way, be able to have horses on it? And
so again, I think, Jim, it's a very similar response that I just gave to, I'm not sure who was the previous person, was Scott, I believe. It would be the same for us. If ultimately the use of the land remains the same, so somebody wants to buy a small acreage and they want to kind of have the rural life, we're not looking to disturb that or to change that. And so ultimately it would be allowed to continue based upon what we plan to do to amend our bylaws. If, however, that individual purchased that 5-acre lot and wanted to then subdivide it off, as I said earlier, the rules would then change for them because now it would become more of an urban setting.
okay, thanks, Wally. That puts me at ease.
Are there any other questions that you can see, Marlisa?
I can't see anymore. I haven't seen anything else pop up on chat either. Oh, we've got a question from Chris. Please unmute and ask your question. Oh, Chris's hand went away.
Actually, Marlisa, it's Roberta. I don't know why it came up with Chris. But my in-laws are actually asking a question, and they want to know if they decide to sell, how would a new buyer be affected?
I guess I need to ask a couple questions back.
Okay, I'll see if I can get them to unmute. Wally, just hang on a second. Okay, go ahead. I will try to get in touch with them.
Okay, so the question I would have, I guess, is again, I think we're not so much focusing on ownership, we're focusing on use of the property. And if use of the property remains virtually the same as it is today, then the commitment that's been made between the town and the RM is that those people would be allowed to continue to do that. And only if the change in use occurs is there a trigger then that converts kind of the land from rural operation to an urban operation.
Okay, and they're also asking how long a process do you think this is going to take?
So as we identified earlier, we've had control over this process since, I guess it's been 2018 or so. But again, a few things, elections got in the way. Ultimately, this is a very large initiative. And so it took some time to negotiate between the town and the RM, and obviously to engage the public. We've had a lot of work that has been done. So it's been a couple of years already that we've been involved in this. And of course, COVID has really put a real a real wrench in the gears in terms of our timeline. The problem that we have is that once we hand over our information package to the municipal board, as we hope to in April of this year, we do lose control over the timeline of the process. It then becomes their process in terms of when they decide, when they make a recommendation to the minister, and when the minister decides to make a recommendation to the cabinet. Those are all on their timelines. We will be talking to those groups and asking them to move that process along, but we really don't have any control. Our hope, as I've stated in the slides, is that by January 1st, 2022, this would be in place. But as I said, after kind of the beginning of April, we may lose control over the timeline going forward.
Okay, thanks, Wally.
Yep. Are there any other questions?
Nothing that I can see right now.
Well, that's there's one.
We have another hand. Drew, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, just a quick question regarding maybe a larger property. If the primary use of the property, like there's a residential area and then there's additional acres, if subdivision happened on additional acres, would that affect the primary area? Let's say there's horses or something on the primary area. Did that trigger in the same way that you're talking about, even if the primary area is not reduced in size and it's just some surrounding acres that are set off?
I think again, Drew, I will defer to this discussion we've had, and that is that if ultimately an individual has been allowed to kind of do their thing up until now, and they are not the individual or group that is selling the land kind of around themselves, then I think we would allow that to continue, is how we've talked about it at the table. I mean, the town has currently a farm site, kind of, or at least the last semblance of one in the town limits, because the town kind of surrounded that individual many years ago. So I think this is kind of the same process. We are looking to ensure that those who are doing what they like to do, we're not looking to change that immediately. And if you're not the individual or the group that ultimately is selling the land and developing the property, then we would look for ways to try and ensure that you can continue to do what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I was more thinking as if I was to sell off some of my acres, if I was still able to have horses with chickens.
So that I think would be part of the subdivision process then, probably, Drew. And I think at that point, the application would have to be looked at in terms of, what size of property is remaining. Is it large enough to host, the animals that are looked to be left there, and what's the impact in terms of the subdivision you're creating? Are you going to create a situation? So I think if that is the case, I think the subdivision process allows for obviously the councils to become involved, and so there would be probably discussions with the owner at that point about what their plans are and how they see it working, and see if that's legitimate or can be workable going forward, right?
Thank you.
I think these have all been very good questions. Great to get the feedback. Obviously, as I said before, we're interested in ensuring that people get the opportunity to ask questions and to have their fears or their the things they're looking for information on, to get that so that they can feel comfortable and confident in terms of the process we're following through. No one is looking to do anything but to ensure that everyone is informed. And I'll repeat again what the Reef said earlier. I think it was a very good comment that we're looking for a win-win-win situation here, where the community, the town, the RM, and the residents can all benefit from what's going to be created here. So if there are no further questions, maybe we'll just move on to the next slide. Mayor Lisa, is there any more?
Nothing yet.
Okay.
Well, seeing that there are no more questions, I would like to thank all those that have participated tonight in this forum. Your questions were certainly welcoming. And with exception to the one that the distance away from the lagoon, how far is the buffer zone in between, which we certainly will get an answer back to you, if not sooner, before the 25th of March, we certainly will have an answer for you. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Wally Melnyuk and my council, the RM of Rockwood, Reeve, West Upland and council, and all the homeowners who took the time to be on this forum with us tonight. Thank you so very much. And if there are any other questions, because I know these are challenging times where because of we're going virtual, not everyone has access or a way of using these virtual and technology things that are provided. So anything that you can do in the process to get those questions to us, we will be more than happy to help and to answer those questions. So thanks again, everyone, for your input, for your support, and I hope you have a good evening.